Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Alex. Let's
Yes.
start off today with a song. We're talking about the War of 1812. Oh, come back, proud Canadians, to a time before TV. There was no hockey night in Canada in August, or even CBC. In 1812, Madison was mad. He was the president, you know. He thought he'd tell the British where they ought to go. He thought he'd invade Canada. He thought that he was tough. Instead, we went to Washington and burned down all his stuff. This is all about the War of 1812, but not actually the battle where they burned down Washington. We're talking about the war, we just got applause from the car, about the war battle of Stony Creek, which this is what actually got me interested in history. Before this, history was all faraway places, memorizing names and dates, but this was happening right in our own backyard here in Hamilton. So the war Stony Creek, Battle of Stony Creek happened on June 6th and 7th of 1813. But to understand the battle, you have to understand what led up to the battle. And in the end of May, there was cannon fire across the border on the Niagara River between Fort Niagara, the American fort, and Fort George, the Canadian fort. And Fort Niagara was a much, much better fort, and it wasn't due to Yankee know-how, it was just more or less an accident of history. So you have to look at the history before the history, and that goes way back to when the first European came to this area. It was the French, and they built a nice stone fort and a trading post in the best location. And they had this nice French fort, and it stayed a French fort until the Plains of Abraham, when the British defeated the French and the French had to leave New France, and the Union Jack went up in Fort Niagara. The Union Jack stayed there.
Cam, sorry, I had to interrupt Cam
Yeah.
to make it a bit translation in Russian for our
Okay.
Russian viewers. So
You got to sing in Russian too.
my friend Cam, он мой друг Cam, он 8 generation of Hamiltonian and Canadian, 8 поколений его предков жили здесь, приехали в прошлом, конечно же, из Европы, они жили, обосновались здесь. И сегодня Кэм рассказывает нам о войне 1812 года между Соединенными Штатами, тогда образовавшимися только, и еще даже не образовавшейся, а продолжающей оставаться британской колонией Канады. Вот он, сегодня он рассказывает нам об этом.
So we've got the Union Jack up at Fort Niagara, and it stayed up until another war came around, the War of Independence, and the Americans won their independence, and when they drew the border, it was right on the border line, but it was on the American side, so the Union Jack came down and the Stars and Stripes went up on Fort Niagara, and the British thought, what are we going to do? This is an important area, important place to have a presence, so they figured that we needed to build a fort, and we need to build it fast. Now the Americans had the best spot, so they chose the second best spot, which was right across the river, and they wanted it done quickly because they worried there might be more trouble with the Americans. So they just went to the Dollar Tree on Thurlstone Road and bought one of the prefab fort kits from there, and then they built up Fort George out of wood. They had lots of made in China wood at the Dollar Tree. So they have this wooden fort and a stone fort, and when they start training cannon fire, stone's a lot harder than wood, so the stone stayed and the wood just went in splinters, and the Americans were smart enough that they heated up the cannonballs first, so then the cannonballs set the splinters on fire, and Fort George was pretty much destroyed. British troops had to hightail out of there.
Кэм немножко в шутливой форме рассказывает о строительстве фортов с канадской стороны, с британской стороны, американской стороны, across from the river, с реки Ниагара, с обоих сторон реки Ниагара. Так что здесь самый very good, хороший кусок земли, который возрождающаяся Америка, Соединенные Штаты хотели забрать себе.
So the British troops retreated over 60 miles from Fort George all the way back to the Burlington Heights, which is behind us. They set
Британские
up.
войска стояли немножко впереди, и здесь мы находимся на месте как раз, откуда наступали американцы и где оборонялись канадцы.
They had about 700 men at Burlington Heights there, and they were making their encampment, getting prepared to settle in there. And an informant named Billy Green came and told them that the Americans were coming, and told them their precise location then, which was at the Gage Farm, which is in Stony Creek, where the actual tower commemorating the battle is. And Billy Green told them how many were there and how they were set up, and the British troops said, uh-oh, because they had 700 men, there was 2 brigades, 3,500 Americans there at Stony Creek, so they thought, there's no way we can beat them in an even fair fight, so we're going to have to take them by surprise, so they decided on a night raid.
Обороняющиеся